Hey, welcome back to another Live with Tim. It is good to have a great friend of mine I met on a recent trip, and I will say that one of the things I love about Mike Johnson is he loves the Lord with all his heart. He is a strong conservative Republican from the great state of Louisiana, but more importantly, he's a husband and a father who understands and appreciates some of the issues that we're struggling with as a country. And I think my faith informs me on what to do and how to treat people. I think Mike has the same experience. Mike, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for coming over and doing this. This is my first live and in person.
Hey, no
with
pressure.
Anybody.
No pressure.
Anybody in the whole world. We got Mike Johnson in the house.
This is a great event for me. It's an honor for me to be with you on the podcast, and I'm such a big fan of you and what you do. And I sent you a text and told you how much I genuinely appreciate your voice in this important moment that we have for the country. And you have just been hitting a home run in the media, and it's such an important perspective. So thanks for all that.
Absolutely. Well, I must say that listening to you, your expertise is not just being an attorney. I mean, that's kind of generic. You have an expertise in the Constitution.
Yeah.
You're a constitutional attorney. You've seen a lot in your life, and how does your faith and the foundation of the Constitution inform you on race and race relations, and why is race relations important to you?
Great questions, and we've been talking a lot about that.
Yes.
The last few weeks. I have made the point very clearly, and I think we have to speak with clarity and conviction and consistency right now about our foundational beliefs. What do we believe as Americans, as conservatives, right? And the idea that racism is an inherently un-American idea, right? It violates the basic premise of America and the basic premises of our faith, of course. Right?
Absolutely.
And why do we say that? Because, the central idea of America, as you talk about all the time, is articulated in the Declaration of Independence, our nation's birth certificate. And it says very clearly that we hold these truths to be self-evident, right? That all men are created equal. It doesn't say born equal, it says created equal, right? And there's implications to all this, because if we are all indeed made in God's image, which the founders believe, then that means that every single person has inestimable dignity and value. And your value is not related in any way to the color of your skin, what zip code you live in, what you can contribute to society, where you went to college, none of that, okay?
I'll preach, by the way.
Come on. Your value is inherent because it's given to you by your Creator. That's what the founders said, right? So that is the statement of faith that began our country. G.K. Chesterton famously said, that old British philosopher, America is the only nation in the world that was founded upon a creed. And that's our creed. So, and of course, we believe the Bible says that we are indeed made in God's image. Yes. So here's the point. Like, if somebody says, Tim, that they have some sort of natural right of supremacy over their neighbor, they violate not only the foundational creed of their country, but the greatest commandments of the God that they serve and who made them, right? Wow. And we have to say that emphatically because it's so true.
Well, you say that one more time, because I got to tell you that you are so clear, so compelling. I want to reinforce that point, because sometimes it's easy for me to think that Republicans, we get it right all the time, and Democrats get it right none of the time. That's not true.
No.
Sometimes it's the rich know more than the poor. That's not true.
Right.
So all these stereotypes that we have of people and people groups, you've just said that's not a part of who we are as Americans. No. And not as who we are from a biblical perspective of how we see the world.
Both of those things. And I think a lot of people that watch your podcast or like friends of mine, constituents of mine, they will self-identify as Christians. They'll self-identify as patriotic Americans who love the Constitution and our founding principles. This is our quintessential founding principle, the idea that we're all equal and made by God. Now, we haven't lived up to that yet, and that's the point that we have to carefully acknowledge, that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said the Declaration was a promissory note to future generations. As you quoted that too. I mean, we haven't reached it yet, but we're in the process of forming this more perfect union, as it says in the first line of the Constitution.
Right.
We're going to get there, and events like we're seeing in the country right now can be a positive inflection point, a moment to help us advance that cause further if we handle it the right way. And so we need calm voices and voices of reason and experience like yours, and I think it's just critically important right now.
Well, I certainly have shared my experience about my interactions with law enforcement, both positive and negative. I've talked about my experiences here on the Hill. I feel like I have a unique experience, but I'm not the only person with a unique experience. I mean, frankly, I think all of us have unique experiences. Some are more important right now than others, and you've raised a couple of kids.
Five, actually.
5 kids.
Yeah.
And my understanding is that you said before that you've raised 2 14-year-olds. Can you talk to us about, your family, beautiful wife, loves the Lord, and your kids? Walk me through and help us understand and appreciate who you are, and talk about those 2 14-year-olds and the difference in their experiences and why.
We've been talking about the last few weeks about this interesting dynamic in our family that a lot of people, even back in my district, aren't aware of. Everybody knows Kelly and I back home. Everybody knows Kelly and I have 4 children: Hannah, Abby, Jack, and Will. That's our kids. And my oldest son, Jack, is 14 this year, as you mentioned. And he's just, as all my kids, we're truly blessed, and they're just smart, sharp kids. They're gifted by God. They got lots of potential and lots of opportunity, right? And Jack is certainly a kid like that. He really is. But this is not my first experience raising a 14-year-old boy. And what a lot of people back home didn't know until recently we started talking about this is when Kelly and I were newlyweds, we actually took custody of Michael, who was my first 14-year-old. Ironically, he came to us when he was 14.
Wow.
You've seen the movie The Blind Side. That's our story. I mean, almost, it's very similar.
Are you suggesting that you helped raise a football player
No.
who now is in the football?
Except for that detail.
No?
No. My Michael was not an NFL prospect.
No, okay. Time out then. So, if I hear you right, what you're suggesting is that you've had an Alabama moment.
Sort of, yes.
Even though you're in Louisiana.
In the LSU context,
Okay.
yes, no.
So, you raised an African American. You adopted an African American.
Time
out. Tell me
It's a long, complicated story that we don't have time for the whole podcast.
Okay.
The short version of it is,
Yes.
Tim, that I was doing the Young Life Ministry in Baton Rouge when I was in my last year of law school. I met Kelly. We got engaged and were married within a year. When I met her, we just sort of knew it was a God thing. And in that period, Michael was a big part of my life because I had befriended him in the Young Life Ministry. He was about 13 at the time. And through a series of just kind of tragic family events, he literally was out on the street. And so I went to pick him up for club one night, Young Life, and I was picking up the kids in the neighborhood, the inner city neighborhood, and I said, "Where's my boy? Where's Michael?" They said, "Well, Michael doesn't live here anymore." "What do you mean?" "Well, he lives out behind the Walmart." I said, "What do you mean he lives behind the Walmart?" Drove out there. Sure enough, it was a sleeting, cold January night, and Michael was in a cardboard box behind the Walmart. I said, "Boy, what are you doing? Get in this car right now." Long story short, Tim. The system in Louisiana failed him. He was at the age where he fell between the cracks. He couldn't go into like a men's home, and he couldn't go into like children's custody. He was in that weird age thing. And long story short, we took custody of him, went to the court and took custody of Michael to take him in as our own. And so why is all that relevant right now? This is a very sacred thing to our family. We don't talk about this. Michael's in his mid-30s now. He lives in California. He's got 4 children of his own.
Wow.
He and Adonze, they have a great life. He's a doting father. He's a great success story.
That's awesome.
But he had a very troubled past. And what resonates so much to me about the dialogue we're having in America right now is, I have a lot of friends, and you probably do too, who don't acknowledge that we still have a race issue in the country. Right?
Almost taboo to say we actually have a issue in the country.
And a lot of our friends will say, "Hey, we're conservatives. You ought to pick yourself up by your own bootstraps and make it. And this is America, and everybody's got the same opportunity." And you and I know that's not always true.
Not always the case. Yeah.
And some kids don't know they got bootstraps too. You know what I'm saying? Like
Absolutely.
so. And my experience is with these 2 14-year-old boys. They're both handsome, articulate, gifted kids. There's not really a lot of difference between Michael and Jack at age 14, except that Michael is black and Jack is white, right? And the challenges that Michael has had in his life, that I've walked through with him for the last 20 years, my son Jack will never have to face that. He'll never be racially profiled. He'll never have the problems that Michael's had getting a job. He won't have hurdles in the way. He won't have people that stereotype him the way that Michael's been done. And that's just a sad, harsh reality of life in America, and we have to acknowledge it first so that we can be able to work on it.
Well, it sounds like to me you actually have not only acknowledged it, you've lived it, worked on it, and he seems to be doing pretty well.
He's doing real well. He's
father of his own now.
Yeah.
4 kids.
It's such a delight to me to see him doting over his own 4 children, and he talks with us. I mean, he's very open about his experience, and he knows, and he's told people. I'm so grateful that God intervened and brought Mike and Kelly into my life, because I was on a bad path. I mean,
yes.
he would have gotten on drugs, been in the gang, maybe wound up in prison or worse.
Right.
And he openly acknowledges that. And so, God's used it in all of our lives to really teach us a lot of things. And it's, again, it's not something we've ever really talked about publicly.
Right.
It's
It's
just
been 20 years almost.
It's been 20 years.
Yes.
But the last
yeah.
few weeks it's come out, and I talked to him yesterday about all this, and I said, there's kind of some new media attention on all this. And he says, I'm not worried about this at all. I'm happy to tell this story.
That's awesome.
We just never wanted him to be exploited or the situation or anything, because that was something sacred to us and our family.
I'm glad you're sharing it now. I'm really glad you didn't share it before, because the power of sharing it now and the timing, I think it's Esther 4:14, for such a time as this.
Yeah.
Can you tell me if you could give our listeners or viewers 3 lessons, life lessons that you learned from raising an African American with lots of potential in the environment that you were in? Any, it doesn't have to be 3, but
Yeah, well, I mean, the big thing is that, we often talk about working on problems in Washington, and there is a policy prescription to some of this, but I made the point in our House Judiciary meeting a little while ago that really this is more fundamental than that. This is it's a heart issue, right?
Yes.
And it's, if we could learn to see one another as God sees us, we'd solve so many problems in the culture.
overnight.
But it's so hard to do. And one of the things we've learned in this is that it is difficult to have the kind of empathy for other people if you've never, walked a mile in their shoes, to use the old cliche. If you've never been into that environment, been into their world, so to speak, to see the experiences they have, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a fact that Michael did not, even though has all the same natural abilities as my other son Jack, right? His foundation and his experiences were so different that he had not the same opportunity. And so when we forge public policy, we ought to be working on and thinking about greater mobility for more people. We talk about working on economic policy.
Yes,
How is that
yes.
related? Well, what is the goal of tax policy and economic fiscal policy? The goal is to have more economic mobility for more people so that we can broaden the pathway out of poverty for more people. You do such great work in this area.
Thank you.
We're trying to get people to be able to grasp the American dream and take hold of it. And for decades, that was beyond the grasp of many Americans.
Absolutely.
Sometimes because of the color of their skin and no
Yes.
other reason. And so those are just realities, and they're painful. Again, people don't want to acknowledge this, but we have to be able to diagnose the disease before we can actually find cures for it, right? And this is a moment, I think, with voices like yours and others that we can focus on that and make people acknowledge it so that we can begin to really work on the root problems.
Tell me if you can agree with this. I believe that there's racism in America, but America is not a racist country.
Absolutely. Great point. And, if you go to individual people, I mean, almost every constituent I have, I've got 760,000 constituents. You have a whole state. You go to individual South Carolinians or individual Louisianians and you ask them about what's important and what they believe, they'll all say the right thing, and they genuinely, I think many of them in their heart believe that.
Yes.
They would never think of themselves as looking down on another group of people or whatever, but we do have this common experience in our culture that there are those barriers to some that don't exist for others. And that's such an important point. We are not a racist nation. We are a great nation. We're the greatest nation in the history of the world, by God's
Somebody
grace.
say amen.
Come on.
Amen.
But it's because of these founding principles.
Yes.
The point is, we have to work harder to live up to and fulfill those founding principles.
Well, we raise the standard on ourselves.
Exactly.
I will say this, and one of the reasons why I know I'm going to get some flack from some people when I said that America is not a racist country, and I'm going to get flack from other people who say, why did I say that there's racism in America? Because both are true.
Yeah.
We're not a racist country.
That's right.
But can you imagine, and because you studied the Constitution, one of the things that struck me, I was talking to a friend of mine named Ben Navarro, and he said, we might be the only country on earth that tore itself in half to give voice to
That's right.
the oppressed people who had no voice.
That's right.
600,000 people lost their lives in a civil war. I think that reflects positively on the lengths that we have been willing to go as a country to deal with this problem. Right. Now, that was the beginning, dealing with the problem. That doesn't mean that the problem's been solved, but let's take a step back and remember that 600,000 Americans fought their brothers in a civil war.
That's right.
For a cause of freedom that won out. That
great.
to me, that reminds me, if we can do that, then we can avoid another one, but we do have to continue to lean in to this moment that I believe is designed for us today so that we can take another leap into the future.
I think that's right. And I think there's also the recognition that we have a greater challenge in this regard, arguably, than any other nation on the planet, because most countries, of course, have indigenous folks that, right, they're all homogenous, they have the same genealogy and all of that, and we don't. We're a melting pot, right? And so there's challenges that come along with that. And we've been trying to work this out for 243 years, longer, and we'll continue to do that. But in the age in which we live, with the ability we have to have open communication like this, if we'll have the right tone about it, then we can really make some positive change. If everybody will put their partisan bickering stuff and agendas aside, and just work on these root issues about how we see and treat each other.
Yes.
It's so critically important because it's fundamental. Not only to who we are as Americans, but who we are as human beings, and those who are made in the image of a holy God, and we owe Him that, and we owe that to each other.
Amen. Like that. Well, final thought here is I'm working on legislation around police reform that I think doesn't create a binary choice between supporting law enforcement or supporting communities of color. I think it's really supporting America and what's best for our country. I think, however, that no matter whether or not my legislation passes, I hope that it does, I think it will have a positive impact. I think we'll see some good things coming out of it. The root to the problem cannot be solved by simply a piece of legislation.
That's exactly right.
I think the problem is deeper than legislation. I think the problem is deeper than a racial divide. I think the problem goes to the heart of who we are. It's a heart issue. It
is a hard issue, and I'll give you a quick conversation I had last night. The director of our local YMCA's had this idea, and he said, "Man, we got to foster greater understanding." And we talk about Sunday morning, the hour in Sunday morning being the most segregated hour in America. It's always been that way. He said, "What if we use the YMCA's facilities as a neutral forum to have two churches on a Saturday night or a Sunday night? Let's set up an event, and we'll have a black church and a white church. We'll put everybody together in the same facility for recreation time and kind of force them to fellowship and get to know one another. Couldn't we break down some barriers?" Simple ideas like that. Law is one thing, policy is one thing, and we have a responsibility.
Yeah,
right?
That's what we do for a living.
Right.
Yeah.
But this issue has to be solved at the local community level, through churches, through, everybody in their neighborhoods. We don't know our neighbors anymore.
Absolutely.
Just fundamental stuff. And if we can get back to that, we can solve so many of these problems. And we'll need less laws to do it.
Yeah. Well, this is a great place for us to slow it down and call it a day. Let me say this. I've learned a couple of things from Mike. Number one, if you want to solve this problem and work towards racial reconciliation, the first thing we have to do is understand our birth certificate.
Yeah.
That's a really important part.
That's right.
The second is understand that we were all created with intrinsic value, not just born with it, but created with it.
Right.
And the third thing is go adopt a kid.
That's right.
One that doesn't look like you. That's really good.
That's right.
Listen, that to me is so, when you said that, I was like, time out. What a powerful statement of unconditional love. Reminds me of 1 Corinthians 13, that love seeks to do something for others that they can't do for themselves. I think it's also Proverbs 31:8 that says if you want to stand out in life, stand up for those who can't stand for themselves. You do that for Michael, and now Michael is doting on 4 kids of his own.
It's great.
I hope you've enjoyed it. This has been a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to Mike coming back in person. God bless you.